What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Board Games Are For Everybody, where today we're going to be talking about Senjutsu, Battle for Japan. More specifically, we're going to be doing a how to play Senjutsu, Battle for Japan. And the reason I'm doing a how-to for this game is because when we were trying to learn it, the instruction book isn't the best for this game. It's a little confusing here and there. It also kind of jumps around every which way as to what's actually going on. So we went to YouTube to try and find a tutorial for the game. And everything that I found on YouTube was just stuff from, I want to say pre-Kickstarter, like before the game even released. It was like, oh, this is a turn of Senjutsu. This is like setup or stuff like that, like a turn for it. It didn't really go over how to actually play the game. It was just kind of going through, well, this is what you do in a turn. It didn't really have everything you need to know. Hopefully that makes sense the way it makes sense in my head. But as a result of that, I just wanted to do a quick how to play. To my knowledge, we've only played a couple times, and I'm going to stress this is how I understand it. I'm only going to be going through the basic rules. There is a little section of advanced rules that we just haven't gotten to yet, so I'm not going to be going through the advanced rules, just the basic rules to my understanding of how the game works. And the only reason I'm stressing that is because last time I played a game only a couple times before I did a how to play on it. It didn't go very well for me. So stressing this is to my knowledge. We're just going to hop right into it. Let's toss this back here. I do have the rule book here for any stuff that I need to reference, which is actually going to be quite a bit because I don't quite remember what all the pieces are called. Like these guys, I don't remember. One of them's the advantage marker. One of them's for your other thing. We're just going to go through things step by step here. So first things first, in regards to the way the instructions lay it out, is that you are supposed to choose your character, the character that you want to play as. We already have everything bagged, so everything is already basically set up the way that you want to have it set up here. You have 4 characters that you can choose from. You have the Master, you have the Ronin, you have the Student, and you have the Warrior. I believe there are more characters with the expansions. I just have the base game, so that's all we have to choose from. Let's say we decide we want to go... Well, the cats are tearing around. We can't get away from this. Every time I go to record, they decide that they want to start getting... they want to start getting rowdy. Let's say we want to go with the Warrior here, and we want to go with the Ronin. So these two we can put off to the side, I suppose. We'll come back to those afterwards. So we pick our cards, or our characters, sorry, I should say. We have our Warrior. We have our Ronin. And then we are going to grab our miniatures out of the thing here. So we've got, what do we got here? We have the Ronin, which is this guy here. So we've got our little Ronin miniature, which I don't know if every copy of the game came with miniatures, because we have little cardboard cutouts, but I think the cutouts are for the solo, our little punch board guys here. And then we also have the Warrior. Is this the Warrior? We have our little Warrior miniature here as well. So we have our Warrior and we have our Ronin. The next thing we need to do is we need to set up our playing field. So what you do is you choose between the playing fields that you have. Again, we only have 2 available to us. Well, we have a handful because there's a backside as well. But we only have 2 sets available to us. I do believe there are more in the expansions, but we have 2 sides to this guy here, and we have 2 sides to this guy here. You can, if you so choose, combine them. Like say you want to have something like this, you can combine the fields that you have, or you can just do one area, of which for this demonstration I am going to choose the bridge because I just find that it's a really good setup for a duel. Like, a bridge is a really good setup for a duel, right? So we're going to keep this off to the side for now. So now that we are set up, the next thing we need to do is, according to the rules, I believe you could do more or less. You're supposed to choose 4 of the obstacles that are present in the game. We do have a whole bunch of different obstacles. We've got the gate down here. We've got some boats on the ice. We have some dead bodies. I believe these are double-sided. We've got some burning carts. We have some rocks, which we do have miniatures for a handful of these different things. We've also got some bamboo over here, and we have a shrine. Now, for this example, we're just going to go with a few things here. We're going to go with some of these rocks here. We'll go with our 3D ones, because why not? May as well. Let's say we got some rocks blocking our bridge path here. You're supposed to choose 4 different things, and then between you and your opponents, you're supposed to lay those things out on the map in order. That would block off the entire thing. Let's say we do it like this. We got a couple burning carts hanging off the edge here. So between you and your opponent, you lay out the obstacles in turn wherever you want to put them on the board. After that, you choose your starting position. So you can place your character anywhere on the board if you so choose. However, to make things a bit more interesting, let's say we're actually starting at opposite sides of the map here, which this will actually make things a little easier when I explain movement as well. So now that we have this set up, the next thing we're going to talk about is the advantage tracker, which is this guy right here. Basically, all this does is it just keeps track of what order you and your opponent goes in. Certain cards can advance the tracker to put players into more favorable positions. Mostly it's just for if players are tied. As far as advantage on their card goes, it switches to the advantage tracker. So we're going to take our little tokens right here, our Kame ring and Kame tokens. We got our tokens, if it'll focus. Focus? No. We've got our tokens here, our red and green. Let's say the warrior is green and the Ronin is red. Let's pop these up here so we can actually see them in the video here. So if we look at our 2 cards, our advantage is determined by the top number right up here. So the warrior has 35 advantage, whereas the Ronin only has 27 advantage. So the warrior's advantage token will be placed at the top, followed by the Ronin's advantage token just underneath it. Now there are 4 spaces. The game can be played up to 4 people. I just find it's a little better at 2 players. Now that we've done that, we're going to start kind of going over our cards here. So let's lay out our warrior and our Ronin on this side over here. What you will notice is that underneath each player has a Kame card. These cards are used in order to activate special abilities. As you play cards throughout the game, some of them will have you move to different places on the Kame board. Only thing you really need to remember for this is that you always start on the shrine. So you'll put your ring around the shrine space at the beginning of the game. As you go through the game, you will move to different places depending on what the cards say, and we will get to that in a sec. The other thing you need to notice is these little arrows right here. In some cases, you will move towards this red one here, which I don't remember the name of. They all have different names. But if you move up to the red section of your Kame card here, you cannot move back down. You can only move in one direction going up. So that's what you have to remember for those. The only way to get out of that is if you play a specific card that tells you to go to another place directly, not to move your Kame tracker, but to go to a different Kame position. The other thing you need to remember is that this little rose petal here, which is a focus space, I believe it is. Yeah, the focus tokens. This is a focus space. This does not actually count as a space when you're moving your ring. So say you are on this red space here and you're told to move one space. Well, you can't go down, so you have to move upwards. But because this doesn't count as a space, you actually come up, bounce, and come back to this red space. And that is your one movement. Now, every time you go across the focus space here, you gain one focus token from the pile, which is just a communal pile. Anytime someone either plays a card that allows them to take a focus or passes this focus space on their Kame, correct? Kame card, then they gain a focus token. You can only ever have a total of 3 focus tokens at a time. Certain actions require you to use focus. If you do not have focus, you can't use that action, but we'll get into that a bit more when we get into our cards. So our Ronin has their Kame space here. The Warrior, as you will see, has a different Kame card. Everybody has different setups for their cards. You do still start at the shrine like you do on all of them. However, as you can see with this one, there's a lot more one-way directions. So you're far more involvement. You can't go backwards, but you can go forwards. Unlike with the Ronin, where you can kind of get down in here whenever you want, and only up here is blocked off, this one has a lot of blocked passages. So we'll take our rings. The Ronin is the red, so we put red on the Ronin. We put green on the Warrior. We always start at the shrine space. We've also got our reference cards, just a bunch of different actions and different symbols and stuff for us to remember. These are double-sided. It gives us all of our movements, what is mandatory, what is optional, all of our different symbols and what those symbols mean. Very helpful to keep those reference cards with you. Next up, we have our core card. Each character has a core card that is always a part of their hand. If this card is played, it is just returned back to the player's hand at the end of the turn. This card never gets discarded. Each character has a different core card. This is the Warrior's core card. These cards never get discarded. Just keep those down there at the moment. The other thing about these core cards is that they do not count towards the character's hand limit. You can have more cards, technically, in your hand than what your character limit actually is, your hand limit actually is, because these cards don't count. Typically, you'll have 7 cards in your hand is basically how it works. I need to figure out, I switched all my cards around here, and I was like, oh, I gave the wrong card to the wrong person. Next up, we have our weapon cards. Each character at the bottom of their card has a pool of different weapons that they can use. As we can see with the Warrior, they have the Kanabo, the Naginata, the Nodachi, and the Yari. And we have all of these cards in our... Well, I actually think I have some for other characters in here, but we have a bunch of the weapon cards in here. And to my knowledge, you are allowed to pick one of your weapon cards in order for your character to use. So let's say, what did we have here? We have the Naginata as the Warrior. So let's say the Warrior decides to take the Naginata for this specific campaign. I guess it's not really a campaign, but for this specific duel, let's say the Warrior decides to go with the Naginata. I only have the one in my Ronin one, which is the Nodachi, which is what we're going to be using. Down here, as you can see, the Ronin has different weapons that it can use. It has the Kanaba. Oh, maybe it doesn't have the same. They have the same weapons. I lied. They have the same weapons. Also, the Kanaba, the Naginata, the Nodachi, and the Yari. Kanabo. I definitely pronounced that incorrectly. Forgive me for incorrect pronunciations, because that won't go well. In any case, we have the Nodachi here, the Nodachi Thrust. You can see right here, it says what kind of weapon it is. It says that it's a core card, it's an attack, and it is a weapon. So we're going to give the Ronin the Nodachi here. After that, the next thing we need to do is we need to construct our decks. Each character is allowed to have 40 cards in their deck. And it has very specific requirements for how many cards of certain types can be in a deck. As we can see down here, there are a bunch of core cards, which we'll go over in a sec, because at the back of the book, there is actually a predetermined deck list in there for each character. It's basically like a starting deck for when you're first playing the game to kind of help you out. But there are 4 different classes of cards, and those are referenced down at the bottom of the card here. You can see there's like a wood grain here. Wood cards are your like bottom tier cards, your level 1 cards. Next up, we have these iron cards here, or steel cards. I can't remember what they're referred to as. They are referred to as steel cards. So you have your steel cards, which are this gray banner at the bottom. Next up, you have your gold cards, which have this gold card at the bottom. And last but not least, you have jade cards, which have this green banner at the bottom. Now, when you're constructing your deck, like I said, you are allowed to have 40 cards in your deck, and it's not limited to these. This big deck of cards right here has all sorts of different cards, different leveled cards that you're allowed to choose from when you're creating your deck. So long as your deck consists of 40 cards, not including your core cards, since those cards always stay in your hand, then you're good to go. However, you are only allowed to have a certain amount of certain types of cards in your deck. Let's just skip past all this solo stuff here and get to this deck list here, because it'll help me out. Oh, well, actually, this helps me out right here. Perfect. According to the deck construction guidelines, for wood cards in your deck, you may only include up to 3 copies of each wood rank ability card. Now, this isn't saying you can only have 3 wood rank ability cards. It's saying you're only allowed to have 3 of the same kind of wood card. You can have as many wood cards in your deck as you want, but you're only allowed to have 3 of one particular card. For the steel cards, you can include up to 2 copies of each steel rank ability. For the gold, you can have 1 copy of each gold rank ability. Your deck may not include more than 8 gold rank ability cards in total. So you're only allowed to have 8 of the gold cards in your deck, and you can only have 1 copy of each gold card. Last but not least are jade cards. You are only allowed to have 1 jade rank ability card in your deck. So you're only allowed to have 1 jade card in your deck, period. They are typically fairly strong abilities, which is why they are limited to only 1. So outside of those particular rules, only having 3 of a kind for a wood card, only having 2 of a kind for steel cards, only having 1 of a kind and a total of 8 gold cards, and only having 1 jade card in your deck, you're allowed to construct your deck pretty much however you want, which is pretty cool. I have not gone through that big deck of cards yet and looked at all of the different cards. I've only looked through this sheet on the back here for your character decks. As you can see, the Ronin and the Warrior right here, they have pre-constructed decks, so you can hop right into the game right away. I don't have these decks set up, so we're not going to be using them. I'm just going to be basically shuffling the cards that I have here. Now, there are multiples of certain cards in there. We're just going to ignore that little factoid from the rules in so that I can explain stuff as opposed to putting the deck together, because it would take a little bit of time, and I should have done it before, but I didn't. But if you want to hop right into things right away, back on page 39, right at the end of the book. There are pre-set up decks that you can go through while you play the game, which is pretty cool. I would say that is pretty cool. Now that we have all of that set up, our decks are set up, our battlefield is set up, we got our cards, we have our Kame stuff, we have our characters all set up here, we are going to get into the gameplay. So first things first, just shuffling up the deck here, let's do that. First things first, after we shuffle our decks, let's just say that's shuffled, shuffle this up quick. On our character card on the second slot there, it shows us what our maximum hand limit is allowed to be. So as we can see on the Ronin here, on that second spot, we have a 5 beside the cards. That means we are allowed to have 5 cards in our hand, plus our core cards at any given time. And the Warrior is the same, 5 cards, as well as our core cards. So we draw 5 cards. Make sure I'm actually drawing 5 cards. I'm looking through the camera. 5 cards. That is our hand for the Warrior. Draw 5 cards, and that is the hand for our Ronin. Now, your hand is kept secret, including your core cards. You don't reveal them to your opponent. For the sake of this, stuff is mostly going to be set up. Face up, just so we can see everything. Shift this stuff up here. It's a little bit off camera there, but that's a little better. There we go. Okay, so decks just off to the side. So here is our, put our core cards here. Here's our Warrior's hand. Put our, oh, what did I do with my other core card? Oh, did I not give, oh no, here it is. I was like, did I not give my Ronin an ability card? But I did. A weapon card, but I did. And there is our hand for our Ronin. So now that we're pretty much set up, the only other thing we have is just our status effects over here, but we'll get into those as we get to it. Now that we're set up, we can actually start a game. And the first thing that you want to do once the game starts is that each player selects 1 card from their hand and they place them face down. They place them face down before revealing them to their opponent. So each player would take whatever card they want to use, place it face down, and then once all players are ready, they will reveal their cards, and then they will play out the turn. I apologize. They'll play out the turn in accordance to their advantage. However, it's not the advantage on this tracker up here. It will actually be the advantage on the card. I'm just going to put these up here. Now, the cards that we used were our core cards, which, as you can see up in the top left-hand corner here, both have a 0 on them. Now, that 0, whatever the number is up in the top left-hand corner here, that is the advantage on our card. And whatever number is higher is the card that will play first. Now, because both characters played a card with 0 advantage, they would normally be the last player. But because they are both tied, this is where we now move to the advantage tracker. And because the Warrior has the higher advantage between the 2 players, the Warrior will be the first to go. And this is where we're going to get into our card knowledge a little bit here. So first things first, there are a bunch of different actions on this card, and we get to do them in order, starting from the top, going down, and this we'll get to when we get there. First things first, we have to discard 1 card from our hand. So we have to take any of the cards from our hand and put them into our discard pile. Now, you are supposed to put your discard face down according to the rules. If you find it's easier to put your discard face up, that's something you could do. I suppose it could give your opponent an advantage in seeing what you've gotten rid of. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to put it face up. I feel like I put it face up when we were playing as well. But let's say for now, we're going to get rid of the ripping claws. We'll get rid of the ripping claws. And we put that into our discard. Now that we have discarded that one card, technically I lied. We need to back up a little bit before we do all this. We were supposed to draw a card first. Both players were supposed to draw a card. So, draw a card, discard card, back to where we were. First thing you do, all players draw a card from their deck, add it to their hand, and then you choose to play your card. Okay, we're good. We're back where we were. So now that we have discarded our card, we can continue on to the next step of the action, which is these two right here. Now this is a movement action. If we take our reference card, you can see right up here, it shows an optional step. Because it is in white, it's optional. Anything that shows up in white is optional. Anything that shows up in black is mandatory. You have to take that action. However, because these are white, if we want to move, we can move. The other action here is a optional rotation. Now, the rotation refers to, on our characters here, we have a little arrow right at the front of the character model. This arrow determines what the orientation of our character is. So, say we put him back down here, we are currently facing this way, kind of a southeast. We're facing southeast at the moment, coming down this way on the board. So, should we choose to, we could do this one movement in any direction that we want, which we would probably want to do because we want to start making our way towards our opponent so that we can attack them. But something in the rules that I don't really think came across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 when we played is that if you are 6 or more spaces away from your opponent, then your one move can be treated as a 3 move, but that is only if you are more than 6 spaces away from your opponent. So, in this case, we are currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces away from our opponent with 7 spaces between us. So because of that, we could move 3 spaces if we so chose. Now, we would have to move 3 spaces in the same direction that we're going. But because we also have these optional rotations, we can choose to rotate if we choose to. I'm saying choose a lot. If we wanted to, we can also rotate our character in order to change their orientation. Now, something that did come up, and I believe is in the rules, is that when you are doing focus, thank you. When you're doing optional movement, you are allowed to break those movements up however you want to. However, I don't know how that works with the first move. Say you want to do your 3 spaces, but you can only go, like in this case, we can only go 1 space this way because we hit the edge of the bridge here. Not that we couldn't jump off the side of the bridge, I suppose. But if we wanted to stay on the bridge, we would have to come to this space right here. And that would be our one movement. We can't move more this way, but we do have our rotation. So if we chose to rotate, we could rotate 1 space counterclockwise here, which would now give us an eastward orientation on the map here. And that's probably where I would stop it. I personally would make it so that I cannot move the extra spaces there because we already used up our movement, even though in the rules it says you can go 3 spaces. Because we're not going in a straight line, I would assume that because we moved and then stopped, that takes up our movement for that turn. And then we have our optional rotation, which we did. We chose to rotate ourselves 1 space counterclockwise, which gave us an eastward orientation on the board. Now that we have done those steps, we come down to these ones here, and these ones give us a choice. We don't do all of these, but because we have some ors here, we get a choice of choosing which one of these we want to do. So we could draw up to 2 cards, or we could draw a, this is hobble, I believe, so we would draw a Oh my God, what's the card here? It's like a status affliction. We would draw a status affliction card, but we would also gain one focus token. Remember, we said that those little blossoms there are focus. So we would gain a focus token. And looking back on this, you'll actually see that that is a hobble token. And there is a little plus beside it, which I believe refers to the back of the card. It's like a super hobble, basically. Or we could change our Kame up to one branch. Remember when I said earlier when we were talking about our Kame cards, we can choose to change where on our Kame board our marker currently is. And I think that's the one that we're going to go with, just so we can kind of explain that as we go through here. So we are going to use this last action to change our Kame up to one branch, and we are going to use it to go from the shrine over to the red space on the Kame track. So now that that's done, because this is a core card, it goes back to our hand. Like I said, we do not discard our core cards. They remain in our hand and do not count towards our hand limit. And now that the warrior has done their turn, it comes to the Ronin. And now, like we did with the warrior, the Ronin also has to discard a card. So we're going to be discarding a card as the Ronin as well. Let's say we want to discard this spiraling flames here. We'll put that in our discard pile. And now we can move on with our movement. Now we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces between us and the opponent. So we could use our movement in order to move closer to the opponent. Like we did before, we have that optional movement of 1, and we have 2 optional rotations. And we are going to use that movement, and since we can go in a straight line before we rotate, we are going to go that 1, 2, 3 spaces, thanks to there being 6 spaces between us. And we're going to use a rotation of 1 to go clockwise, which will put us in a northwestern orientation here. Now that we've done that, we have similar options to what the warrior had on their core card. We have draw up to 2 cards, or draw a stun plus. This, if we take a look on our reference card here, is a stun icon. Or we can change our Kame branch up to 1. We can change our Kame up to 1 branch. Oh, I skipped a step here. And we can also switch to any Kame that we want. We can switch to any Kame that we want. So what we're going to do, just so we can explain how our status effects work here, is we're going to go with this second option here. We're going to go with draw 1 stun plus. So we are going to draw 1 stun card, which I'll just take all these out here. I guess we have our poison, we have our wounds, we have our hobble, and we have our stun. So we're going to take one of these stun cards, and I guess I don't remember what the plus does. I'm going to have to I'm going to have to double check that at some point. That plus is probably important. It probably means something. There isn't a plus on my reference card. There isn't a plus on my reference card. Let's go to the handy dandy rulebook, and we're going to check out our status conditions here. Nope, that's all player setup. I am not seeing anything about this plus. It's possible that it is a advanced rule, which I said at the beginning of the video I have not been through yet. So we might just leave it as a regular stun for the time being, and we'll move forward with that. When I get through the advanced stuff, we'll see how that goes. However, in any case, we are going to take a stun card. Stun cards count towards your hand size. For each stun card you have, you lose 1 card in your hand. This card cannot be discarded from your hand. However, you may play this card as an ability card. The ability card is the ones we placed face down at the beginning of the turn. Now, the way we played this was that was how you got rid of your stun, is basically you're using a turn to use up this stun in order to get rid of it. Otherwise, you're stuck with it. I don't know if that's the way that the rules properly play. That's kind of how I took it from the rule book, because it's kind of confusing saying that it cannot be discarded from your hand, but you may play it as an ability card, and ability cards are then discarded. So we figured that's how you get rid of it. If that is incorrect, someone just let me know down below, because it would be great to know the proper rule. And last but not least, if you have as many stun cards in your hand as your character's hand limit, you are defeated. So in the case of the warrior and the Ronin, both of them have a hand limit of 5 cards, which means if either of them were to have 5 stun cards in their hand at any given point, that character would be defeated and lose the game. So we're just going to add this stun card to our hand here for the Ronin, seeing as he now has 1 stun card. We're going to add this back to our hand here. The last thing we need to do from that action is to move our Kame to any place that we want. Now, that means we can move it to the red, we can move it to the green, or we can move it to the yellow. We are allowed to do any of those actions that we want. It doesn't have to stay on the line. So, as a result of that, let's say we want to move up to the yellow space. For the time being, we'll move our Kame ring up there, and that would end our turn. Now, that is the final thing that a character does in a turn. We now have to count our hand sizes in order to ensure that no one is over their hand limit, which in the case of the Ronin, we are over our hand limit thanks to that stun card. We now have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards, even though the Ronin is only allowed to have 5 cards in their hand. So we have to discard a card from our hand and place it into the discard pile. So let's say we get rid of Short Strike here. We put that in our discard. And we are now able to continue on to the next round. And play generally continues the same way throughout the entire game. You're moving towards your opponent, trying to get in close, and then you're going to start trying to go for those attacks. But there are a couple things that I want to explain as we go along here. So we are going to go through those first before we get into combat. So specific things that I want to go over as kind of a side note are things like these colored spaces right here. Now, this means that in order to use that specific thing, you have to be in that Kame space. So if you played Scything Uppercut as the Ronin, you can see that it has a priority of 5, an advantage of 5. However, if you happen to be in the yellow Kame track space, which we actually are currently in the yellow Kame space, that advantage of 5 would now move to an advantage of 8. So you would be moving a lot sooner than you would have been before. Likewise, with this green one, while it doesn't give you an increase to your advantage, it gives you this other option with a optional movement of 1 space either forward or to the left or right of your current orientation. You have to remember that the way that these are laid out are in accordance to your current orientation. So with regards to the warrior who is currently going east, if we were to lay this way, he can either move 1 space east, he can come this way to this hex right here to the southeast, or he could, provided that this cart wasn't up here, come to the northeast space here. Even though it wasn't the warrior who was moving. I shouldn't have used that as an example. But you get the idea. Now, coming down here, you will see that this one has the focus color on it. Now, typically, like I said before, you cannot actually land on the focus space of your Kame card. You just skip right by it. So, because of that, if you want to use one of these, you have to actually spend your focus tokens, which I don't think I gave to the warrior when we went through that. We should have given him a focus token. In order to use those, you have to spend focus tokens. Now, right over here, you can see how many focus tokens you need to spend in order to use that ability. That pretty much sums that up. There are other ones. There's ones for the red cards, say, having to be in the red space on the Kame track, stuff like that. So that is pretty basic for all of your Kame stuff. The only other thing we need to explain, which I don't have an example of, I will grab one here, is this right here. This is a focus icon. In order to use this card, you must give up one focus token. If you do not have a focus token to give up, you cannot use the card. Likewise, with the cards that require you to be on a certain Kame space on your Kame cards, you are not allowed to use a Kame card if you are not in that particular Kame space. Now, you are still allowed to use the other parts of the card, like this priority of 8 is strictly for if you're in the Kame area, but you would still be allowed to use this bottom movement of 1. You just wouldn't have a priority of 8 anymore. Stuff like that. So it's a little bit to kind of wrap your head around, but as you start getting into it, it's not actually as bad as it sounds. It becomes very clear as you're going through stuff. I believe that's everything for cards. The only thing I did not bring up, which I don't know if I have any at the moment. I do. I have one right here. Say, for instance, this short strike. This little icon off to the left here with the lightning bolt and the arrow. I believe this is on our thing. It is not, but the lightning bolt is. The lightning bolt is regarded as an instant action. Basically, the way that this works, the lightning bolt with your little arrow to the right there, is that, say you played your cards up here, and say your opponent plays their warrior, and you play your Ronin core cards, and you've now seen what your opponent has. You know that this is what your opponent has, and maybe you want to try and counteract it with something else. If you have one of these, what were they called? Sorry, one of these instant reaction cards. I believe the arrow is considered a reaction. Then you are allowed to switch your active card. Well, you're supposed to discard your active card. You would take whatever card is active, discard it, although in the event of the core card, it goes back to our hands, and you would replace it with the short strike card. So if you are using a normal card from your hand, you are now basically using 2 cards in order to get the leg up on your opponent now that you know what they are using. And that is pretty much everything that we need to know about cards. So we're going to get into actually attacking now. I will go over the other status effects as we get to them. We are going to go over wounds. We'll go over hobble in a sec when we get to it. And the poison we're not really going to get to because I don't think we actually have many poison cards. So we'll go over the poison really quickly here. The base game only comes with 1 poison, Crippling Poison. Shuffle this card into the top 5 cards of your deck. When choosing ability cards, if this card is in your hand, it must be chosen. So basically it's just a card counterproductive to whoever ends up having it. In the case of that one, it's just wasting your turn. You are forced to use it instead of being able to play something. So it just causes you to skip a turn, pretty much. There are more poison cards, to my understanding, in the expansions. The base game only comes with the 1. And I don't think a lot of the attacks actually give out poison, at least in the base decks that we played with. We never encountered poison at all. So let's get into combat. I'm going to do my best with some aspects of combat because there are a couple things that I do not remember. But let's say we get our guys right in front of each other here. They are now primed for combat with each other. And the way combat works is pretty simple, honestly. Let's say our warrior is going to play this pushback, which will help me explain something else. It's going to play this pushback. Now, this isn't actually going to do any damage. As you can see, this has a little asterisk where the space, I'm trying to think of the right word here. The space that would be affected by the attack, basically. In regards to our warrior who is facing east, it would be in this orientation here. So it would be the space directly in front of the warrior, which in this case is where the Ronin is. But as you can see with the asterisk down here, it causes you to push your opponent 2 spaces. We're not actually doing damage, we're doing push, which is good because I'll be able to explain how collisions work, which is actually what I was worrying about because collisions are a little weird. But we'll go over collisions. So let's say that the warrior decides to use the pushback and our, let's see what we got here, 8, no, that's everything around, well, we have to be in red for this one. So let's say we switched to red instead of yellow. And our Ronin is going to use the short strike. Now, our Ronin has the advantage of 5, which means that they are going to be going first. And like we said before, as you can see up here, they must be in the red Kame space, which we switched to, just ignore that part. Must be in the red Kame space to go to use this card. Now, we get an optional movement of 1. However, since we're prime position in order to attack our opponent, we won't be moving at all. And then we get to do an attack. The exclamation point determines how many wounds your opponent will suffer. Because there's only one exclamation point, because there's only one exclamation point, your opponent will suffer 1 damage should they be hit. Now, in the case of the Ronin, if we look at our orientation here, it's going to attack the space directly in front of it, which, if I zoom in here, I don't know how close I can get before I cut them off, which, as you can see, the Ronin is right in front of our warrior there. So we're going to be attacking the warrior for 1 wound, since that is how many exclamation points are on our short strike. So our opponent is going to take 1 wound card. Remains in play, counts as 1 wound. If you have as many wound cards as your character's wound limit, you are defeated. So we have 1 wound now down here with the warrior. I'm going to put it up here so we can actually see them. And your wound limit is determined by that little exclamation point down at the bottom left of your card. In the event of both the Ronin and the warrior, that is 5 once again. So should either of our characters sustain 5 wounds, they will be slain and defeated. The other player will win. Now, seeing as we were in fact successful with our attack, as we can see down here, this little samurai helmet is in reference to the targeted character. So it's just saying that the targeted character must discard 1 focus token, which they do actually have. So they would have to discard their focus token. Uh-oh, I'm knocking things around here. I am knocking things around here. Well, that kind of worked. There we go. Okay, so now that that has been used up, it goes to the discard pile. And we move to our warrior, who has pushback at an advantage of 4. Now, we get an optional rotation, but as we said previously with the Ronin, we are actually in prime spot in order to attack the Ronin from where we are. So we are going to do our push action, which targets the space right in front of us, which happens to be the Ronin. And it pushes the target character 2 spaces, which cannot actually be done because there is a burning cart behind the Ronin. So what happens when a character collides into a structure? This is something that is actually in the rulebook that I will just read off of it because the collisions were something I actually had trouble with. That's all advanced rules. Where are you, collisions? I know you're in here. Advanced rules, block effects, push and pull. Collisions, here we go. So, in accordance to the collision section in the rulebook on page 16. If your character is forced to move into a battlefield hex that is unavailable because it is out of bounds, draw a stun card. Do not move your character and move the discarded section of the turn sequence. And move to the discard. So basically you get stunned and your turn's done. Sorry. You get stunned and your turn's done. You don't move your character and you go to the discard section of the turn sequence. Do not resolve the rest of your card. If your character is forced to move into a battlefield hex occupied by terrain, follow the rules on page 23. Then move to the discard section of the turn sequence. Do not resolve the rest of your card. If your character is that's another character. We're going to word that. So page 23 it told us to go to, which I think is part of the advanced rules. Train and blocking, train rules, battlefield hex, character move. There we go. If, no, that's on the wrong side. Over here. If a character moves into a hex occupied by terrain, return that character to the hex immediately before the terrain hex and apply any resulting effects. See below. Characters may not move through battlefield hexes occupied by terrain, even if their move would result in a character finishing their turn. So, if you run into a rock, a character forced to enter a hex containing a rock receives a stun. If a character is forced to move into a bamboo, they get a stun and a hobble. If an attack effect that deals damage to bamboo, the bamboo is removed from the battlefield. That's just a little side tip there. If a character is knocked into a burning cart, which in this example is what we have, the character is forced to enter the hex containing the burning cart, receive a stun, and receive 1 wound. The other stuff here also goes through all of the things that you encounter. It is mostly stuns that you encounter for running into an object, and you also, in this case, gain a wound. So, because our Ronin ran into the burning cart from the pushback, because of the pushback from pushback, it's going to receive another stun token. This is putting it at 2 stun. And they are also going to be receiving 1 wound. So our Ronin is also now at 1 wound. Not the best, but coming up for the warrior. So now that is done, that also goes to the discard. Just going to try and zoom out here a little bit more. We didn't quite get to our 1. There we go. There we go. Okay. And that is pretty much how battle works. There are multiple scenarios as far as battle goes. As you can see with this card here, some cards have your attack being 1 or even possibly 2 spaces away. Attacks are not always directly in front of you, as we could see in the case of Ankle Biter here, which is the one that I just had up. The attacking is actually 1 space in front of the space in front of you, or 1 space to the northeast of the space in front of you. We also have something like Scything Uppercut here, where your damage is actually going diagonal in front of you. So different cards have different parameters for where the attack actually is, and it's something you need to consider while you're doing your attacks, because sometimes retreating so that you can attack farther back is an option. Now, the other thing that I need to clarify as far as combat goes is if you choose to defend. Defending is in accordance to these little shield icons. The way that a block is considered successful, this is basically played the same way as a attack card is, but the way that the block is considered successful is if any of these shield icons either block the icon, that the exclamation point icon, or if it blocks the opposing character. So in the event of this, say that the Ronin was attacking the warrior with their attack there, their short strike, which only attacks the space in front of them, But the warrior plays this steel block card, which, as you can see up here, it says 7 to 3 as an advantage. It's because you can actually choose any of the numbers between that, how you want to play it. Now, in a 2-player scenario where that short strike was a 5, you would probably want to play it as a 6 or a 7 so that you can block the attack. And blocking attacks works the same way. If you cover up the space that your opponent is currently on, or you cover up the space of the attacking area, the successful attack zone, you're actually going to block your opponent's attack, and it's going to save you from taking a wound. And that is more or less how the game works. After that, you're just continuing play as you go through trying to take your opponent out. You're retreating, you're going here and there, you're diving in behind obstacles, trying to figure out what the best maneuver is for you to take out your opponent while also not being taken out by your opponents. The only thing I think I didn't cover was Hobble, which we will quickly talk about here. So with Hobble, Hobble is a status effect, remains in play while active. Reduce the initiative speed of your played card by 1 to a minimum initiative of 1. So say you were to play this ankle biter card, which has an initiative of 3, you would actually end up with an initiative of 2 while Hobble is in effect. At the end of the turn, rotate this card 90 degrees clockwise. Then, if this card is upright, discard it. So as the turns go on, your Hobble starts like this. At the end of the turn, you're flipping it 90 degrees clockwise. And then we're going all the way around. And once it is back up at the 12 position, you discard the Hobble and you are no longer hobbled, which is great. So Hobble basically lasts 3 turns of your initiative being lowered by 1. Not a fun time. The other thing to talk about, which we didn't come up when we were doing combat here, is the backside of the wound cards, which is bleeding wounds. Certain cards cause your opponent to bleed out, and then you will give them a bleeding wound. Remains in play, counts as 1 wound, so your bleeding wounds count as a wound card. Well, you have at least 1 bleeding card at the start of your turn. Before you draw, you must discard the top card of your deck face down to a maximum of 1 card. If you have as many wound cards as your character wound limit, you are defeated. So that's how bleeding works. We've gone through Hobble, we've gone through stun, we've done wounds, we did poison briefly, even though it's something that hasn't come up. We went through combat, we went through defending, we went through our Kame cards, our character cards, we even went through our reference cards. We went through setting up your deck, even though we didn't actually set up a deck. We went through setting up your playing field with your obstacles, where to put your characters at the start of the game. We have pretty much gone through everything we need to go through, with the exception of one thing, which I just remembered, is that as you go through your deck, you may have such a long battle going on that you run out of cards in your deck. If that happens, you take 1 wound every time you cannot draw a card. So it's basically forcing the end of the game. You want to try not to end up with no cards in your deck, because then you basically put yourself, if somehow you have no wounds by that point, at a 5-turn limit before you are defeated. So you want to try and keep your deck at a healthy level and take out your opponents as quickly as possible. But you have to make sure that you defend yourself as well. And that is everything, I think. At least as far as the basic rules go, we covered pretty well everything. And I think I did an okay job with it. There's a lot to go over, and there's a lot of stuff that I hope I explained well enough. I know that this video is a little long-winded. An hour to learn how to play a game is a bit much, even for me. I try and learn stuff as quick as I can, but I also tried to go as in-depth with it as I could, because like I said at the beginning of the video, I could not find videos online fully going through how to play the game. Some people explained solo mode, some people explained just how a turn goes, but no one was explaining how the entire game goes. So I wanted to get that out there for people who may have been having trouble like I was. And like I said at the beginning, we didn't go over the advanced rules. I do want to hop into solo at some point because there is a solo mode, and I think that would be interesting to go through as videos, and maybe we'll do that once I get around to learning it. But for the time being, I'd say I'm pretty happy with this. I hope I went over everything properly. That's the only thing that I'm a little worried about. I did everything to the best of my knowledge, the way that I know how it works, the way that I learned, based on the rule book that is a little odd, but to say the least. But hopefully it helps someone. Hopefully it helps someone. That is the whole goal of videos like this, is that hopefully it will help someone the way that it helped me so they don't have to struggle the same way, basically, like I did when I was going through. But yeah, that is it for Senjutsu Battle for Japan. This is how you play the game. Pretty self-explanatory once you get through it. It is a lot easier than the rulebook makes it sound out. So hopefully those who are out there playing the game, having trouble with it, this was able to help them out and get them into it more, because I do think it's a really interesting game. I think it's a very interesting dueling game, and I think once we actually get into building our decks and working around our own decks, I think that'll be quite interesting to do. I might have to look into the expansions as well if we start doing that. But that's everything for now. So thank you guys for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it helped you out, like I was saying. And hopefully I'll see you all next time. If you're over on Instagram, you can follow us at Board Games Are For Everybody on Instagram. We just post photos of games that we're playing, as well as stuff that we pick up. I also put links to when videos go live here in my stories over on Instagram, so you can always check that out if you aren't subscribed to the channel here, which I am only going to ask you to do if you want to, because we are getting close to our 500 subscriber quota, which is what we need to start monetizing our videos, and I would love to hit that. So if you guys aren't subbed and you enjoy the videos and you want to see more board game stuff, then that'd be great if you feel like subscribing. And once I hit that 500, I'll probably stop asking, because I really don't like doing it. But that's everything for the time being. Thank you guys very much for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I will see you all next time. Until then, just remember the board games are for everybody. Until next time, peace.